we're going to take a look at this piece by Eudora Welty, One Writer's Beginnings. With a rhetorical analysis, we are looking at a text and analyzing not what it says, but how the author chose to say it. It's the coming together of the rhetorical situation, context, exigence, audience, speaker, message, purpose, while looking at style, tone, and the rhetorical choices. It's a lot, but we can do it. All right, let's start with the prompt. In the following passage from her autobiography, One Writer's Beginnings, Eudora Welty recalls early experiences of reading and books that had later impact on her craft as a writer of fiction. In a well-organized essay, analyzed how Welty's language conveys the intensity and value of these experiences. Now let's take a look at what we can learn about the rhetorical situation from the prompt and just glancing at the passage. For context, we look at the external factors in the world since writing does not happen on its own. Writers create texts in the middle of culture and ideas. We can see that it was published in 1983 during the presidency of Ronald Reagan, who had campaigned with an idea to overhaul American education. This is right before the publication of an educational reform piece called A Nation at Risk. The Cold War was still going on, an early 80s recession was ending, so that's a little bit about that atmosphere around when this piece was written and published. For the exigence, which is what immediately prompted the writer to write this piece, we know that it's an autobiography. So for a writer to write an autobiography, she's probably been writing for quite some time for the public to care. So the construction of the autobiography and her desire to share behind-the-scenes stories is the exigence, what prompted her to write. For readers, for audience, the audience is readers of Welty's autobiography, so that they're probably familiar with her work and have an interest in the topic, which is her and her stories. Our speaker is Eudora Welty. She's our writer here. From the prompt alone, we can learn that she is a writer of fiction. For the message, we can see in just our prompt that there is value in books and early reading experiences. And the purpose thus far is that she wants to share that value with readers. We'll learn more. I created a do-what chart to help focus my reading and prepare for my essay. It's a do-what chart. The do is the verb, the what is what the verb is doing. So based on the prompt, I'm going to write a well-organized essay, and I'm going to analyze how Welty's language conveys intensity and value of these experiences. And then I clarified what these experiences means. If I go back in the prompt, it's those early experiences of reading and books. So I'm going to analyze how Welty's language conveys intensity and value of those early reading experiences. And we know that they do because she became a writer of fiction who became well known and respected enough to have an autobiography that people wanted to read. So those were influential experiences. When we're doing a rhetorical analysis, we want to divide it into sections or chunks as appropriate by the content. Because of the shifts in subject of this piece, I'm going to have the first two paragraphs as section 1, the third paragraph as section 2, the fourth paragraph over here as section 3, and then the last paragraph here as section 4. Those are just my chunks that I see as I'm moving through the piece. So let's begin with this first section. I never knew anyone who'd grown up in Jackson without being afraid of Mrs. Calloway, our librarian. She ran the library absolutely by herself. From the desk where she sat with her back to the books and facing the stairs, her dragon eye on the front door, where who knew what kind of person might come in from the public. Silence, in big black letters, was on signs tacked up everywhere, She herself spoke in her normally commanding voice. Every word could be heard all over the library, above a steady, seething sound coming from her electric fan. It was the only fan in the library, and stood on her desk, turned directly onto her streaming face. As you came in from the bright outside, if you were a girl, she sent her strong eyes down the stairway to test you. If she could see through your skirt, she sent you straight back home. You could just put on another petticoat if you wanted a book that badly from the public library. I was willing. I would do anything to read. I want to go over just some of my annotations with this. The first one that I picked up on was that capitalization of library. By capitalizing a common noun like library, Welty is given the place that holds the book's value. It becomes a proper noun like a person's name, god, or a title. I also brought up the dragon eye. The metaphor of Mrs. Calloway having a dragon eye creates intensity out of librarian watching over her books by comparing that to a dragon protecting treasure. Welty is also relating her experience to events and characters from her readings. So we're starting to see that the value of books is being shown in how she's telling this story too. Then silence. It's in all caps. It shows the intensity of Mrs. Calloway and her signs. I also then made note of, you could just put on another petticoat if you wanted a book that badly from the public library. And this phrase after the colon seems to be coming from the librarian and shows her as an antagonist, as a villain to overcome in order to get to her goal, her treasure, which is the books. My mother was not afraid of Mrs. Calloway. She wished me to have my own library card to check out books for myself. She took me in to introduce me, and I saw I had met a witch. Eudora is 9 years old and has my permission to read any book she wants from the shelves, children or adult, Mother said, with the exception of Elsie Dinsmore. And Elsie Dinsmore was the long-suffering young heroine in a popular series of children's books written by Martha Finley and first published in 1868. Later, she explained to me that she'd made this rule because Elsie, the heroine, being made by her father to practice too long and hard at the piano, fainted and fell off the piano stool. "You're too impressionable, dear," she told me. "You'd read that, and the very first thing you'd do, you'd fall off the piano stool." Impressionable was a new word. I never hear it yet without the image that comes with it of falling straight off the piano stool. For which, we really have this vilifying diction that shows the evil of Calloway, at least according to the childlike perspective Welty had at the time. With any book highlights the freedom that her mother gives her. She can read any book there, except the one where she might learn how to fake faint. And then I did highlight that last line there. Welty can remember where she was when she learned the word impressionable, and it was around the experiences of books in the library, and out of her mother's fear, she would try to fake fainting to stop playing the piano. Mrs. Calloway made her own rules about books. You could not take back a book to the library on the same day you'd taken it out. It made no difference to her that you'd read every word in it and needed another to start. You could take out 2 books at a time and 2 only. This applied as long as you were a child, and also for the rest of your life, to my mother as severely as to me. So 2 by 2, I read library books as fast as I could go, rushing them home in the basket of my bicycle. From the minute I reached our house, I started to read. Every book I seized on, from Bunny Brown and his sister Sue at Camp Rest a While to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, stood for the devouring wish to read being instantly granted. I knew this was bliss. I knew it at the time. Taste isn't nearly so important. It comes in its own time. I wanted to read immediately. The only fear was that of books coming to an end. a couple of my notes for this section. That Welty is following the rules of Callaway in order to read because it is important to her. Her language here shows how eager she is to read. 2 by 2, as fast as I could go, rushing from the minute. The choice of detail here, showing an example from a children's series to a classic science fiction novel, as both books she seized and devoured. That diction really showing that insatiable curiosity and desire to read. And the only fear was that of books coming to an end. Welty's overcoming the fear of Callaway and now has the fear of books ending. My mother was very sharing of this feeling of insatiability. Now, I think of her as reading so much of the time while doing something else. In my mind's eye, the origin of species is lying on the shelf in the pantry under a light dusting of flour. My mother was a bread maker. She'd pick it up, sit by the kitchen window, and find her place, with one eye on the oven. I remember her picking up the Man in Lower 10 while my hair got dry enough to unroll from a load of kid curlers trying to make me like my idol, Mary Pickford. A generation later, when my brother Walter was away in the Navy and his 2 little girls often spent the day in our house, I remember Mother reading the new issue of Time magazine while taking the part of the wolf in a game of Little Red Riding Hood with the children. She'd just look up at the right time, long enough to answer, in character, "The better to eat you with, my dear," and go back to her place in the war news. At the end of this passage, the word insatiability about reading describes both Welty and her mother. Her experiences with her mother shaped her current perspective on books. The anecdotes, these specific memories from her past, showcase her memories about her mother reading and show that that influence was powerful and an everyday occurrence in her formative years. This "the better to eat you with, my dear," shows that her mother could interact with children in their language of fairy tales, as she read about more serious issues as well, but she still participated in the reading lives of children even a generation later. For this rhetorical analysis essay, have a thesis that analyzes how Welty's language conveys the intensity and value of her early reading experiences. Sometimes a thesis frame can help you. I'll show you on the next slide. Discuss the language choices made in each section of the piece and show how those choices show how important these moments were and how the early reading experiences might have had an impact on her. Refer to specific words and phrases, do not quote long pieces of text, and explain the effect of each of your examples. Here's a possible rhetorical analysis thesis frame. Through the presentation of blank and blank, Eudora Welty conveys her message that blank to her audience. The blanks are overarching topics like ideas, diction, tone, but always mention what type of ideas, what type of diction, what type of tone. Try it out.